Hello, everyone, and welcome to Product School. My name is Chris Roberts. I'm a product manager at BCG, and I'm here with Iuliia Artemenko. Today, we are going to talk to you about how to prioritize a product backlog.
So a little bit about ourselves. My name is Iuliia Artemenko. I'm, as well as Chris, product managers currently at BCG. We have been product managers for quite some time. Previously, I worked for various software products in companies like HubSpot and Experian, and most of my experience working with various lifecycle of different products, but across various global operations. And I work with analytical tools and mostly tools in space of CRM and configure price quote.
And my name is Chris Roberts. I've worked primarily in fintech prior to BCG in a variety of roles. At BCG, I have played have worn a number of hats, focusing on everything from product strategy to incubating new products to working on acquisitions and figuring out how we integrate them into the broader BCG portfolio. So product backlogs, many of you as product managers are product managers, so you know what these are already. But for those of you who are not, they really are just a listing of here's what we want to put in our release. They are things like new features that you want to develop, new ideas that your team is working on, bugs that you guys have found, or technical debt. This could be anything from configuring servers to doing more advanced things like making your code faster or different things like that. And as you work on a release and as your product grows, this product backlog will grow quite a bit. Everyone's constantly adding new ideas. You're constantly moving things around. And it's really important to maintain it and maintain it often. Often it will become stale, and you'll really need to make sure that what your team is developing and what your team is focusing on is, in fact, actually the right thing. So it's very, very important to constantly maintain it and keep it prioritized. So there's numerous things that can impact a product backlog. First and foremost is commercial targets. This affects me probably most on a day-to-day basis. And how is what am I developing going to deliver value to clients? Different features will unlock different capabilities, and these capabilities will drive commercialization. Perhaps it makes your product better than a competitor's or makes your product stand out more in the marketplace. Perhaps it's the thing that is going to allow you to sign a certain client or deliver the necessary value to a client in a case team that's going on. And for non-consulting products, it could be, this is how you affect a certain segment of your market or allow a certain type of user to want to use your product. And so very often I'll be thinking about, I'd really like to reach a new group of users. What are the features that are going to let me do this? What features are going to make them want to use my product more and more? And what features are going to help me keep selling this product to them again and again and again for many years into the future? The second bucket that can affect things is risk mitigation. So very often there's numerous risks across all factors of your product. And it's important as a product manager to figure out what these risks are and build features into your backlog that can help mitigate these risks. They could be things like security, where you're building things to make sure that your product doesn't get hacked or that your product can work in different geographic areas and affect things like GDPR and other considerations that you have. Perhaps, though, there's risks with key accounts. Maybe a certain client is evolving in a certain direction, and you as a product owner need to evolve to be able to keep the revenues from that client. Perhaps it's protecting a key account from a change in the market. Maybe there's a new type of product or a new type of companies that are posing an oncoming threat. And so to be able to mitigate these risks with the features that you build are all very important. Then there's financial considerations. We've spoken about commercialization targets, which are very important. But you also want to think, how does a certain feature affect you financially? Perhaps it will save you time and money. It could make your product easier to maintain. It could make your product easier to deliver. It could make everything efficient overall. And thinking about how certain features in your product can increase revenue beyond simply sales revenue is very important here. And it can also help you figure out how do you maximize the budget you have and deliver as much as you can with the budget that you have. Related to this are resource considerations as well, and how you can build products or how you can prioritize your backlog to be able to account for the resources you have. Maybe you have extra capacity now and that you want to build more into your backlog to account for this excess capacity. Perhaps you have highly skilled or certain resources that you know can deliver only certain features, and it might be a given time before you have those resources again. So you want to make sure to build or to prioritize your backlog to account for those resources. Lastly, there's stakeholders. And as a product manager, you all, I'm sure, are aware that you have numerous stakeholders. So prioritizing the backlog to account for these stakeholders is also important. Perhaps you prioritize certain stakeholders to make them happy, to make them keep wanting to work with you and keep providing value to the products that you build. Perhaps you're trying to grow stakeholders in a certain direction or grow to capture a key stakeholder, and you want to be able to build features to be able to do this. So these are just 5 of the various factors that can influence a backlog. There's many others. These are some common ones. So they're all very important things to think about as you're going ahead and building your products.
And the next one I will talk about is actually, where do you start? How do you start the prioritization process after you looked into your backlog? And a lot of us could be either new product managers, or we just started at this specific company, not as familiar with the product. So this is a simple steps that help me as a product manager to decide where do I start and how to leverage this more formalized prioritization framework with my current products. So the first step I would advise everyone is to just evaluate your current backlog. What is the size of it? How many stories, how many different features do you have in the backlog? What is the composition of those stories and features? Is this mostly functional requirements, or maybe it is a technical debt, non-functional requirements, some architectural requirements that you have, because that will help you decide how most effectively prioritize these features based on where they're coming from. And also look into what are the sources of this backlog? Is it coming a lot from support, directly from customers, various stakeholders, delivery teams, support teams across organization? Because that will help you as well, who to go to with the next, some of the techniques in the prioritization. After you looked into your backlog and you now are very familiar and know where most of your features are coming from, what type of features you have, next look into your product itself. Where on the life cycle stage your product is. Is this a new product just launched to market? So maybe you do have a very big, and it is quite healthy to have a big backlog for new product, because you will be getting a lot of feedback and there's a lot of features that maybe some of your competitors have in the market that you also need to develop. Is this a rapidly growing product? Also very similar situation, healthy to have a significant backlog. Or is it a mature product which maybe has a little bit less of specific functional features, but maybe some non-functional features or more innovative features on the backlog? So in conjunction was kind of understanding where my backlog at, what is the status of my product, and how fast is my product developing. That kind of helps you to determine just overall status. Next, evaluate from your organizational perspective. What are the specific goals that they are trying to achieve? Are you trying to move into a new segment market? Are you trying to capture a new addressable market? Are you trying to grow as an organization, sustain your revenue? Because that will help you as well to see which features would be the most important in that prioritization process to your organization. Then you consolidate all of this into a specific list. If you're already using some backlog management tools, that's great. If you don't, check out Trello, Aha, or even Excel, or just using shared documents is a great tool, because from there you will actually start using some of the prioritization methods, which we'll talk about in the next few slides.
Great. So there's many different ways to prioritize a backlog. We're going to talk to you about 5 of the most common ways. Starting off with stack ranking, which is perhaps the most basic way to prioritize a backlog, working our way into Moscow, then going to Kano, then taking a different spin on everything with story mapping and weighted scoring. So stack ranking, probably all of you do this in some way, shape, or form in your day-to-day, but it's really just creating a single list of features and things that need to be accomplished, with the most urgent at the top and the least urgent at the bottom. When your development team goes through and starts building these, they take the first thing off the top of the pile, go through, build it, test it, implement it, and then move it to the done pile. When this is complete, they then take the next item and so forth until everything in the list is complete. So it's very, very beneficial, and that is as easy of a way to manage your backlog as possible. It's also a good starting point for people who aren't very comfortable managing the backlog yet. It's very basic. You have one list. It's very easy to maintain. The other advantage to this is that it helps avoid priority creep. You know what the most important things are, and they're at the top, and you know what the least important things are, which are at the bottom. Very often, you'll run into all of your stakeholders and yourself saying, you know what, everything is very urgent, therefore everything gets the top priority, which is not sustainable for managing a backlog. Some pitfalls, though, is that is heavily biased towards the maintainer of the list, which is very often you. So it's important to keep your objective hat to think through what is the most, what are the actual highest priority items, not just the items that I want myself personally. And it's also difficult to kind of reprioritize this list based on the changing needs and requirements of your product. The next one is the Moscow method, and this is probably one of the most common ones used by product managers to maintain their backlog. Moscow stands for must have, should have, could have, or would have. So the must-have items are the ones that are the features that are required for your MVP. Without any of these, your MVP will not get the passing check mark, and you absolutely need to deliver on all of these. Next up is the should have. These are the features that are very critical for the release. Eventually, you're going to need them, and ideally, you would have them tomorrow. The could have items are the items that can wait. There are features that are very nice to have. They can be done if there's time with a few tweaks, but they're not critical to the product or the future success of the product. Lastly, there's the won't haves, and these are a lot of often very great ideas, but for any number of reasons, they're the items that you're probably not going to get to. They end up living in a parking lot for a while. Sometimes they move their way up to must have, should have, or could have items. Very often they just get dropped from the list to make way for higher priority items. So the Moscow method is great in that is very straightforward and easy. There are 4 buckets of items, and everything is broken down quite easily into these categories. It also helps determine the scope of the release. You know from the estimation exercises how long it will take to develop all of these items. You know what is clearly going into your release, and you'll know how much time it will take to deliver your release. It also lets you work with the capacity that you have and be able to make sure the proper timelines are put in place. The problem, though, is that it is very subjective, and like I mentioned in the stack ranking, everything very often gets pushed towards the must-have category. So be prepared to do a few exercises, reprioritizing some of the must-haves into should-haves and could-haves.
Next, we'll talk about Canna model. Canna model focuses priority on user-centric features. This is a great approach to use when you're working with a new product. So you have a very significant backlog of features, and you need quickly understand where these features stand, which are the most important one, which are the least important, how to focus your priority. With Canna model, you would start by actually doing some customer research, and that can be done by actually pulling and asking your customers through a survey, as an example, to rank features based on what they allow, what is surprising them, what they just like, and what are the kind of expected features that they don't really care about. Or you could also leverage different idea forums or sources of customer feedback that you already have as in your organization as an input to that research. So once you have the insights, how do customers feel about the specific features and how do they rank them, you kind of segment these features based into the 3 different clusters and categories. Basic needs. So basic needs would be something that the customers do not really care that much about. These are basic functionalities, something that everyone is taking for granted. An example would be if you are, as an example, using Instagram, right? Adding a photo or being able to take a photo, that's a basic functionality. You just need to have it, but you wouldn't just buy a product to have that specific feature. Second category in the second cluster would be the satisfiers. These are core for product functionalities that kind of define the user experience of the customer throughout the product. Satisfier feature could be something like filters when you're using Instagram or Facebook or any other app, right? So filters really create and shape the experience that you have, but it's also something that your competitors might already have in the market. It is not basic feature just yet because there's some innovation in each type of that filter that you use. And then the third category would be something that the customer is absolutely delighted about. That's something that makes or breaks their experience, something they did not expect to have, did not request, but were surprised by having it. That really kind of fascinated their experience with the product, which could be, as an example, stories when they were launched, right? That was something the customer did not ask for, but were intrigued to use, and it really created the experience of interesting kind of exploration for the customers. So all of these categories will help you quickly understand where does each specific product feature stands in the backlog. The benefits of this method using Canva is that it helps you quickly get there, right? So you not only segmenting the features into backlog and in order of the priorities, but you're also understanding what is really important for your customers. So you are being very user-centric and you're giving the voice to your customers in this case. It also helps you identify some of the opportunity gaps. Maybe something wasn't really on your radar, but customers are marking it as super important for them. So it gives you kind of a good understanding. Maybe some of the features you didn't initially thought your hypothesis were not as strong against developing. But there are pitfalls to this method, and some of the examples that I brought up show you how it doesn't really account for the time, right? So stories, as an example, maybe was a delighter feature when it was initially launched, but it is not a delighter feature now because a lot of applications like Snapchat and Facebook are using the same similar methodology. So it kind of becomes more like Satisfier. And essentially, when there's something new comes up, it will become a basic need. So you really need to make sure that if you are using HANA model, you are taking into consideration the time impact. So you are actually consistently reevaluating the features. And also another thing to consider is because it's an input from individual customers, it might be difficult to consolidate if there are conflicting opinions about certain features. Some people might consider that basic, some people might consider that a lighter based on individual customers. So I would advise you to actually segment the data that you receive from customers based on different audience types or maybe different user personas that you have. That will help you kind of make it a little bit more objective and finalize the final numbers.
Great. Next up is story mapping. And story mapping is a little different way to prioritize your backlog. Story mapping is all about helping, especially during an MVP, walk through all the phases of a project. So very clearly here, an example, you have getting up in the morning. So you get up, you get ready, and then you go to work. Very clear steps along a process that can then have all of the features split out underneath them and have everything involved with getting up actually be broken down to turning off the alarm clock, snoozing, getting dressed, and getting your outfit ready for the day. And so this is a very useful approach. And when you actually are trying to figure out what is the user journey that I'm looking into and how do I want to build the stories associated to it. So one of the biggest strengths of this is it makes it very easy to work with non-technical stakeholders. They get it. They look at what stories are happening and they get the stories that are associated with them. It's much harder to do this with something like a Moscow method or a stack ranking where things become a little camouflage and less clear. It also very clearly communicates the product goals and the vision, and it lets you take something that you can communicate with everyone around you to say, hey, here's what I'm building, and it lets them quickly and easily understand it. Some pitfalls, though, is that it's a very user-focused approach. So very often a lot of things get kind of ignored or forgotten, like technical debt that you have to do, or how complex some of these things are in relation to other things. And the other thing is if there's rework that's required, it can lead to a little bit of ambiguity and a little bit of pain points as you kind of move things around and figure out how to best do things.
Next method we will focus your attention on is weighted scoring. And weighted scoring, it quantifies business value of each feature in your backlog. In my personal experience, I actually combined weighted scoring with Canva model. So at first I did the segmentation through Canva model, kind of understood what are my delighters, what are my performers. And then because I worked with a newer product, it just created a backlog of a lot of different features. So I still needed a bit more help to decide which features to work on the next release or the release after that. So I used weighted scoring to determine that. In weighted scoring, what you do is you pull all your features into one specific list, and then you determine a criteria how you're going to evaluate these features. Some of the common criteria that I would recommend using is impact on the revenue, perceived customer value, could be also some strategic value to your company. And then the second portion of it, you will look from the implementation perspective. So what's the difficulty of implementation or implementation efforts? What are the risks associated with it and the cost that is associated with implementing the feature? You can pick a simple ranking, could be from 1 to 5, 5 being the most important or the highest value, and then you score each of the features in each of the categories. So 5 on customer value, but maybe from revenue perspective, it would only be a 3, or maybe it is a 5 on the risk. And then in the end, you consolidate all of these different scores into one weighted score. So it kind of gives you a rank to where do you want to start, which features your number 1 rank, number 2 and 3, and so forth. So it gives you kind of a very clear guided plan to where you want to start with implementation. So this method, if used correctly, it really gives you that kind of quantitative way of understanding where the most important features are in your backlog, gives you estimated value so you can track the success. You said this is going to be a very high revenue impact once you implemented the feature. Have you seen that specific revenue impact? Can you really showcase that success kind of based on leveraging this method? It can also be used to create strong relationship with your stakeholders because it is a transparent method. If someone is asking you why is this feature not being developed, you can really show them your model and say this feature, is very low. It does not provide any significant impact on revenue. It is not something that customers value. It's low on risk, as an example. So this is the reason why it is not prioritized yet, which kind of creates more functional and constructive dialogue with your stakeholders. It can also be a great input into the model as well. If maybe it is higher on the risk, but you didn't consider that. So they will be able to give you that insight and feedback so you can tweak and refine the model. So some of the pitfalls is that the impact is still an estimate. So like I just mentioned, right, could be that you just estimated that the risk is not high, but maybe other experts in your company will consider the risk as higher. So because it is an estimate, it's not a defined objective value, there could be some shifts and it's not 100% accurate. And also it can be skewed, right, because we are people and we kind of tend to, once you know how the mechanism of this algorithm works, you might be able to just kind of shift the numbers a little bit. So definitely make sure that you run it by a couple of different experts in your company to kind of get an outside perspective. So you're fully comfortable that the model that you build is really representing as objective view as possible.
And that wraps everything up. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We hope that you at least got a few good takeaways or tips for helping prioritize your product backlogs. Please reach out and let us know any questions that you have, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.